Welcome to the channel where history meets mind-blowing facts. Here your knowledge will get a powerful boost with every video. From hidden events to legendary figures, we cover it all. In the vast plains of the American West, where the winds whisper through the grass and the mountains stand like ancient guardians, a child was born to the Oglala Lakota in the early 1840s. They named him Cha-O-Ha, meaning in the wilderness. But the world would come to know him as Crazy Horse. From the moment of his birth, there was something different about him. His light complexion, his quiet gaze, and the powerful sense of stillness he carried even as a boy. He didn't talk much, but when he did, others listened. The elders noticed that he often wandered alone, studying the land, listening to the sounds of nature, and sitting silently for hours. This wasn't just a child playing, it was a soul in deep connection with the earth. Crazy Horse wasn't born into a life of war. He was raised in a world rich with tradition, where the Lakota roamed free across the plains, guided by the stars and living in harmony with the buffalo. His father, also named Crazy Horse, was a respected medicine man. His mother, Rattling Blanket Woman, was known for her gentle strength. Together, they taught him the sacred ways of the Lakota, the importance of humility, bravery, generosity, and respect for all living things. These values weren't taught through lectures but through stories, ceremony, and the way life itself was lived. For the Lakota, everything was connected. The wind, the river, the eagle in the sky, and the warrior's heart. And Crazy Horse absorbed it all, quietly, patiently, deeply. As he grew, the boy began to show signs that he was destined for something far beyond the ordinary. He was different, not just in appearance, but in spirit. He refused to boast. He didn't seek attention or brag about his bravery. When other boys played or showed off their skills, he would be off in the distance, watching the clouds or riding alone through the hills. But when conflict came, when danger was near, he was the first to step forward, calm and fearless. The other children admired him, but they also didn't fully understand him. He was both part of them and apart from them. One day, as a young teen, he sought a vision. He rode out into the wilderness, leaving behind food and water, determined to receive guidance from the spirits. Alone for days, he waited, fasted, and prayed. On the fourth day, a vision came to him. An image of a warrior riding through a storm with lightning all around, untouched by bullets or arrows, wearing no war paint, no feathers. Just a single lightning bolt painted on his cheek. The figure was strong but not arrogant. He moved through chaos like a shadow. Crazy Horse knew what the vision meant. It was him. It was a message from the spirits that he was meant to be a protector, not for glory, but for something far more sacred: his people, his land, and their way of life. From that moment forward, he lived differently. He avoided honors and rewards. When others took trophies in battle, he refused. When others decorated their horses, he kept his plain. The lightning symbol from his vision would become part of his war paint, but he wore it only when necessary, only when the spirits told him it was time. There was a power in his silence. He wasn't trying to become a leader, he already was one. Not by title, but by the quiet strength of his presence. As American settlers pushed further into Lakota lands, tensions began to rise. Treaties were made and broken. Promises from Washington crumbled like dry leaves. The buffalo herds, the lifeblood of the Lakota, were slaughtered. Sacred land was invaded. The elders warned of coming storms, and the younger warriors looked for someone to guide them. Crazy Horse, still a young man, emerged as a beacon in the darkness. He didn't speak of revenge. He spoke of resistance, of survival, of staying true to the Lakota path. Those who met him often described him as mysterious, almost ghost-like. He would appear on the battlefield suddenly, riding straight into gunfire, seeming impossible to hit, moving like a spirit. He believed that if he remained true to his vision, he could not be harmed. He believed in dreams not just for himself but for his people. And as the world around them began to change, railroads carving through the land, soldiers marching across the plains, Crazy Horse remained unshaken. His people began to rally behind him, not just because he was a fierce warrior, but because he reminded them of who they were before the world tried to break them. In him, they saw the ancient strength of the Lakota, a connection to the old ways, to the land, to the spirits. And though Crazy Horse never sought fame, his name began to carry weight across the West. The U.S. Army feared him. Settlers whispered about him. Other tribes respected him. But to his people, he was simply a man walking the path given to him by the spirits, a protector of the sacred, a guardian of a vanishing world that refused to die quietly. The transformation of Crazy Horse from a quiet observer of nature to one of the most feared and respected warriors of the Great Plains didn't happen overnight. It was a journey shaped by vision, pain, betrayal, and a fire burning deep within him. A fire to protect his people from the storm that was coming. While other young warriors fought for glory and recognition, Crazy Horse stepped onto the battlefield with a different purpose. He wasn't interested in medals or tales of heroism told around campfires. He fought because he had no choice, because the land was being taken, because the buffalo were being wiped out, because the heartbeat of his people was being threatened by an enemy that did not honor the ways of the earth. He was still a teenager the first time he killed in battle. It was during a raid against a rival tribe, the Crow. Most warriors would celebrate such a moment, their initiation into manhood marked by blood and triumph. But Crazy Horse didn't speak of it afterward. No boasting, no stories. His eyes held something different, not pride, but understanding. That taking a life even in defense was not a cause for celebration. It was a burden, a responsibility, something sacred. Other warriors noticed this about him. There was a calm to him in the heat of violence, a stillness in the chaos. He never yelled in battle, never panicked. He moved like a shadow, quiet and swift, as if guided by unseen hands. What made Crazy Horse different wasn't just his skill, it was his strategy. While others fought in large groups, he often led small, fast-moving bands that struck with precision and vanished before the enemy knew what hit them. He studied his opponents, learned how they moved, how they thought, and he never allowed arrogance to cloud his decisions. That's what made him dangerous. He didn't fight like someone seeking revenge, he fought like someone protecting a dream. His vision, the one he received during his time alone in the hills. That dream had shown him a warrior untouched by bullets, a man who rode into battle with no feathers, no ornaments, just purpose. And that's exactly how he fought. Even among the Lakota, where bravery was common, Crazy Horse stood out. He would often put himself at the front of an attack, drawing enemy fire to protect his fellow warriors. Yet somehow he always seemed to survive. Bullets passed through his clothing, arrows missed him by inches, horses were shot out from under him, but he kept going. Many began to believe the spirits truly walked with him, that he was chosen not just by his people, but by something far greater. As the years passed, more white settlers arrived, more soldiers, more railroads. The land began to change. The wide-open plains that once stretched as far as the eye could see now echoed with the sound of axes and hammers. The U.S. government began forcing native tribes onto reservations, promising food, safety, and peace, but delivering broken promises, starvation, and confinement. Treaties were signed under pressure or deception. The Lakota way of life, built over centuries, was being dismantled piece by piece. And for Crazy Horse, this was unacceptable. He became a symbol of resistance, not just for the Lakota, but for many other tribes. Young warriors looked to him for leadership. Elders trusted his judgment. He didn't speak often in councils, but when he did, his words carried weight. He spoke of honor, of the duty to protect the sacred Black Hills, of never surrendering to lies. He rejected offers of peace when they came with chains. He refused gifts from the army. To him, freedom was not something to be negotiated. It was something you were born with, and you defended it until your last breath. Crazy Horse wasn't driven by hate. He didn't fight because he enjoyed violence. He fought because every inch of soil beneath his feet was sacred, because every stream, every tree, every stone carried the memory of his ancestors, because the bones of his people rested in the land, and no one had the right to take that away. He rode into battle not with anger but with clarity. He wore a small stone behind his ear given to him during his vision quest. He painted a lightning bolt down the side of his face. He didn't wear the elaborate headdresses of other leaders. He didn't carry decorated shields. He carried the weight of a people trying to remain who they were in a world that was trying to erase them. Soldiers began to fear his name. Scouts reported sightings of him, only for him to disappear like smoke in the wind. He attacked supply lines, ambushed patrols, and disrupted military plans with uncanny timing. He seemed to know where the enemy would be before they got there. He became a ghost to the U.S. Army, a myth, a shadow warrior who couldn't be tracked. The sun was rising over the Powder River Basin, casting long golden streaks across the plains, but tension filled the air like a storm waiting to break. The U.S. Army was moving fast, pushing deeper into Lakota and Cheyenne territory, determined to force the tribes onto reservations. Crazy Horse, now a seasoned and respected war leader, understood what was at stake. This wasn't just a war for land. It was a war for identity, for freedom, for the very soul of his people. And in 1876, with pressure mounting and tensions at a breaking point, the Lakota warrior would become the central figure in two of the most legendary battles in American history: the Battle of the Rosebud and the Battle of the Little Bighorn. It began with the movement of General George Crook, a seasoned military commander who believed he could crush the Lakota resistance by marching deep into their territory and forcing a confrontation. Crook led nearly 1,000 troops along with Crow and Shoshone scouts, tribes who had allied with the U.S. government. His goal was simple: strike a blow that would cripple the native resistance and make the surrounding tribes think twice about continuing the fight. But Crazy Horse was watching, always watching. He knew the land better than any map. He knew the trails, the rivers, the places where horses could move quietly. And more importantly, he knew the hearts of his enemies. Crook expected the Lakota to scatter, to hide. But Crazy Horse was planning something else. He rallied warriors from the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho nations. Nearly 2,500 strong, they moved silently through the hills, driven by something deeper than strategy, driven by survival. Crazy Horse didn't give long speeches or issue loud commands. His leadership came through action. When he rode to the front, the warriors followed. On June 17, 1876, they met Crook's forces near Rosebud Creek in southeastern Montana. What happened next shook the confidence of the U.S. Army. The fighting was intense. Smoke filled the air. Bullets cracked through trees and horses screamed as they fell. But through it all, Crazy Horse was relentless. He launched attack after attack, using hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, and sheer speed to overwhelm the soldiers. He fought with a fierce calm, always ahead of his warriors, always pushing forward. Crook's troops were stunned. They weren't prepared for a battle of this scale. They had underestimated Crazy Horse, and it nearly cost them everything. After hours of brutal fighting, Crook was forced to retreat, falling back and abandoning his advance. It was a rare and humiliating moment for the U.S. Army. The Battle of the Rosebud didn't just delay the American campaign. It gave hope to the native resistance. It proved that the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho still had power, still had leaders, who could outthink and outfight one of the most well-trained armies in the world. And at the heart of it all was Crazy Horse, the man who moved like the wind and struck like lightning. But the Rosebud was just the beginning. A few days later, a much larger confrontation was brewing. General George Armstrong Custer, with the IHC 7th Cavalry, was marching toward the Little Bighorn River. He had no idea what was waiting for him. He believed the native camps were small, unorganized, and ready to surrender. But Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull had united thousands, warriors, families, elders, from multiple tribes into one massive encampment along the river. It was the largest gathering of Plains Indians in recorded history. Sitting Bull, the Hunk Papa, Lakota holy man, had seen a vision of soldiers falling from the sky like grasshoppers during a Sundance ceremony. It was a prophecy, a sign that victory was near, and Crazy Horse was ready to make that vision real. On June 25, 1876, Custer divided his forces, confident he could crush the village with a surprise attack. But the surprise was his. Crazy Horse led a devastating countercharge, riding straight into gunfire with terrifying speed. Witnesses said he seemed untouchable, riding through a storm of bullets, shouting encouragement to his warriors, never slowing down. He didn't fight like other men. He didn't charge blindly. He weaved through the chaos, striking where the enemy was weakest, breaking their lines, shattering their morale. Custer's forces were surrounded, outmaneuvered, and eventually annihilated. Over 260 U.S. soldiers were killed in what would later be known as Custer's Last Stand. It was the most significant native victory in American history, and it was Crazy Horse's masterpiece. The warrior who never sought fame had just delivered the greatest blow the U.S. Army had ever suffered on the western frontier. The aftermath sent shockwaves through the country. Headlines The thunder of hooves had faded. The dust of victory at Little Bighorn had settled, but in its place came something far more dangerous. Silence. A silence filled with warning, with rage, with the weight of an empire that would not tolerate defeat. Crazy Horse had helped deliver the most stunning blow ever suffered by the U.S. Army on the frontier, but he knew what would follow. This was not the end. It was only the beginning of a much darker chapter. The U.S. government, humiliated and furious, was mobilizing with unmatched force. They would come now with everything. More soldiers, more weapons, more lies wrapped in the language of peace. And Crazy Horse, more than any other leader, understood that they would stop at nothing until every Lakota man, woman, and child was on a reservation, or dead. The wide-open plains that had once been a sanctuary, home, were quickly becoming a prison of shadows. The buffalo, once numbering in the millions, were being slaughtered systematically, not just for hides, not just for sport, but to starve the native tribes into submission. Trains carried settlers deeper into the West, cutting through sacred lands like knives through flesh. Forts rose where medicine wheels once stood. The U.S. military built roads not for travel but for war, for pursuit, for control. Crazy Horse saw it all and knew that the old ways were dying, but he would not kneel. He would not sign away his soul for a bag of flour or a promise written on paper. As the pressure mounted, many native leaders began to surrender. They brought their people into the agencies, government-controlled zones that stripped tribes of their freedom and reduced them to dependence. Some chiefs believed there was no other way, that to survive, they must adapt. But Crazy Horse remained in the wild, refusing to bend. He led his people through the harsh winters of Montana and the Dakota Territory, avoiding the army, refusing all offers of peace that came with chains. They lived on what little game remained, on roots, on faith, and while their numbers were dwindling, their spirit remained fierce. What made Crazy Horse different wasn't just his courage, it was his absolute refusal to compromise. He wouldn't sign treaties. He wouldn't move to a reservation. He wouldn't even allow his image to be captured. When white photographers came offering money to take his picture, he turned away. He believed that having one's image taken stole a piece of the spirit. To him, everything was sacred. The land, the people, the culture, and once it was given away, it could never be reclaimed. The army called him a rebel, a renegade, a threat. But to his people, he was something more. He was the last flame of freedom flickering in the cold wind. Even those who had moved on to the agencies whispered his name with reverence. Children asked when he would return. Warriors dreamed of riding beside him once more. He wasn't just a man. He was a symbol, a reminder of what it meant to be Lakota, and that made him dangerous. Not just to soldiers, but to the entire system of control the U.S. government was building. By 1877, starvation was tightening its grip. Ammunition was low, the people were tired, and the army was closing in from all sides. General Crook, the same man Crazy Horse had defeated at Rosebud, now had the upper hand. He offered surrender, not with kindness but with threats. Come in or be hunted to extinction. Crazy Horse, always guided by his vision, now faced the hardest decision of his life. It wasn't about pride, it was about survival. Not just his own but his people's. If he continued to resist, many would die. If he surrendered, the fight would be over, not with a bang but with a broken promise. So in the spring of 1877, Crazy Horse rode into Camp Robinson under a white flag. The man who had never been captured, never defeated, never known fear, laid down his weapons not in defeat, but in sacrifice. He believed that perhaps within the agency system, he could still protect his people. That by surrendering, he might spare them the suffering of endless war. But even in peace, he remained dangerous to the U.S. government. His presence inspired too much loyalty, too much hope. Other warriors began to gather near him. They listened to his words more than they listened to the Indian agents. That was a threat the government could not allow. They began to spread lies. They said Crazy Horse was planning an uprising, that he would escape, that he would kill white soldiers in their sleep. They sent Lakota scouts to spy on him. They used his own people to turn the tide. He was called to a meeting under false pretenses, told to report for a discussion about moving his band south. But when he arrived at the fort, he realized the trap had been set. Soldiers surrounded him. An officer tried to arrest him. The wide-open plains that had once been a sanctuary, a home, were quickly becoming a prison of shadows. The buffalo, once numbering in the millions, were being slaughtered systematically. Not just for hides, not just for sport, but to starve the native tribes into submission. Trains carried settlers deeper into the West, cutting through sacred lands like knives through flesh. Forts rose where medicine wheels once stood. The U.S. military built roads not for travel, but for war, for pursuit, for control. Crazy Horse saw it all and knew that the old ways were dying. But he would not kneel. He would not sign away his soul for a bag of flour or a promise written on paper. As the pressure mounted, many native leaders began to surrender. They brought their people into the agencies, government-controlled zones that stripped tribes of their freedom and reduced them to dependence. Some chiefs believed there was no other way, that to survive, they must adapt. But Crazy Horse remained